In this video, we will show you how to replace your front steering knuckle on this Chevy Silverado. This is part of your front steering and suspension, located behind your front wheel. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing we need to mention is we're going to have to raise and support the front of the vehicle, so make sure you're in a safe area to do so. Once you've raised and supported the vehicle, continue on to removing your center cover. We'll do that by using our 22mm socket. A quick inspection of that cover, set it aside. Continue on with your 22mm socket to remove each of your 6 lug nuts, and then the wheel. With the wheel out of the way, we can start removing the outer tie rod end from our steering knuckle. Along the bottom area, you're going to find that you have a locking nut and a cotter pin. Go ahead and remove that cotter pin, set it aside for recycling. On this application, we'll be using an 18mm for our tie rod mounting nut. Remove the nut, give it a close inspection, and start it back on just a couple threads. At this point, we'll cause some vibration in this area to help break this free. While doing so, let's be extremely careful for the tie rod boot and mounting stud. A quick inspection of the outer tie rod to ensure that it is not damaged. If it is, you need to go ahead and replace it. We'll set this aside for now and make our way to the other side of the knuckle and start removing the caliper. To remove the caliper, we're going to remove the entire caliper bracket from the area. That's including the pads. If you were looking along the backside here, you're going to find that you have 2 18mm headed bolts that hold the caliper and bracket to that steering knuckle. Go ahead and remove the pair and pull the caliper aside. We'll inspect that mounting hardware. Start it back in just a couple threads here. As we remove the caliper, we'll carefully set it aside, putting no pressure on our flex hose. There we are. Let's have a quick inspection of the brake pads. You can typically see them right through this port. If it looks like they're worn or damaged, go ahead and replace your brakes. Here we are. Remove your brake rotor. A quick inspection, set it aside. With the brakes out of the way, let's focus on our ABS wire. The ABS wire makes its way up along the control arm above the frame here. You're going to want to disconnect the connector for this. On it, you'll find that it does have a locking tab. Go ahead and squeeze on that and pull it out of place. It's common for this to have a little push tab along the bottom, pressing it down and in. You just want to pry that out of place as well. As you can tell, ours is previously broken. We're going to continue on dislodging this all the way down to that wheel bearing. As we make our way down here, you'll find that you do have a 10mm bolt holding this bracket down. The bracket holds the ABS wire and the flex hose. Go ahead and remove that bolt. A quick inspection of that hardware. Now we're going to focus on where the ABS wire goes through this bracket. Squeeze on the 2 tabs and pull the ABS wire out of the bracket. We'll use some long nose pliers for this. Now it's time to remove the wheel bearing from the steering knuckle. If you were to look along the backside of the knuckle, you'll find that you have 3 15mm headed mounting bolts holding it in place. Go ahead and remove all 3 of those. We'll make sure that we leave at least one of them in there, a couple threads. Now I'll just turn the steering knuckle real quick, pop this one out of here. There we are. When you go to separate the wheel bearing from the knuckle, it might be stuck in place. If that's the case, you want to be extremely careful not to cause any damage to the bearing. Don't tap on this area. If you needed to, you could carefully tap on the bolt end. Just be careful not to damage your bolts. While we pull this out of place, there's also a backing plate in between the bearing and the knuckle. We'll make sure that we take that off as well. A quick inspection of the bearing and the backing plate, and we can set this aside. We will be reusing this. With the wheel bearing out of the way, we'll continue on down at the lower ball joint mounting nut. Be using a 24mm for this. Go ahead and loosen it. Once again, start it back on a couple threads. Now let's make our way to the upper ball joint mounting nut. We'll use a 19mm on this. We'll continue on by causing vibration along this area, separating the upper ball joint from the steering knuckle. It's important not to proceed until you're sure you do have at least one mounting nut on this area, either on the upper ball joint stud or on the lower ball joint stud. Typically, when you go to separate this, the top will separate, but the lower portion will still have to be separated. If that's the case, continue causing vibration in this area, closer to the lower ball joint. Once the knuckle does drop down to the point that this is at here, we'll continue on to holding onto the knuckle and removing it from the vehicle. Okay friends, it's time to install our brand new front steering knuckle. We'll take this and slide it onto each one of the ball joint studs at the same time. You're going to need to align it and start lifting it straight up. As you bring it into the proper position, we'll continue on with the lower ball joint mounting nut. Go ahead and start that on by hand. At this point, we'll pause on that and make our way to the upper ball joint. You may find that you have to press that upper control arm down so you can bring the stud to a point you can gain access. After that, go ahead and start on that mounting nut as well. Let's start by snugging the lower ball joint nut and then torque that to 74 foot-pounds. Now it's time for the upper ball joint nut. We'll bottom this one out and torque it to 37 foot-pounds. With the knuckle mounted into place, use some copper anti-seize in this center port. Once you have a nice coating on that area, we'll continue on with the bearing and the backing plate. For the bearing and backing plate, you need to ensure that you have it in the proper placement. The backing plate itself has to be facing along the front of the knuckle and definitely not along the backside where that caliper will go. Once you feel as though you have it in the proper placement, we'll be continuing on with our mounting bolts. Make sure they're cleaned, inspected, and use some blue thread locker. Go ahead and start each of these in by hand, snug them up, and then you're going to torque them to 133 foot-pounds. The next thing you'll need to do is clean down the mating surface on the forward side of your wheel bearing and then the back side of the rotor, the contact points where they meet together. You can use a wire brush and some parts cleaner if necessary. We'll use some anti-seize on this area. We've cleaned the back side of the rotor. Let's get it in place and hold it there with one of our original lug nuts. We've cleaned the back side of the rotor. Let's get it in place and hold it there with one of our original lug nuts. Slide the caliper on here. Before you start in your mounting bolts, it's important to make sure you pay attention to that flex hose. You want to confirm that it's not twisted in a knot in any way. That's going to cause a brake fluid issue. Start in each of your two mounting bolts, snug them up. Let's torque each of these to 129 foot-pounds. Along the forward side, it's time for that outer tie rod end. We'll take this and slide it into place. Start on the mounting nut, snug it up, and torque that to 48 foot-pounds. Once you have that torqued, the next thing that you need to do is pay attention to the slots on the mounting nut in comparison to the hole that goes through the stud of the tie rod end. We need those to align. If it's not aligned, continue tightening the nut until the very next slot is, and then install a brand new cotter pin. Let's peen this over so there's no way this nut can loosen up on us while we're driving down the road. Making our way along the top of the steering knuckle, it's time to reattach that brake line bracket. Start in your mounting bolts by hand, snug it up, and torque that to 80 inch-pounds. Move along to securing your ABS wire. We'll start at that flex hose bracket. Go ahead and press it right into position. You want to try to listen for a click and make sure it's secured. Once you have that in place, take your ABS wire, bring it across the top of your control arm. Make sure it aligns with its mounting points and lock it in. I've got a nice click from that. Same for that one. Up along the top, we'll make sure that we reconnect that connector. Press it in, listen for a click. You want to give that a tug, make sure it is secured. Once you have that connected, you definitely want to make sure that you do have this secured to the frame. Just go ahead and press it into position. There's a hole right up along the top. Let's get the lug nut off of here and reinstall the wheel. With the wheel in place, we'll start on all 6 of our 22mm lug nuts. Bottom them out. Get the wheel safely back on the ground, and then you can torque each of these lug nuts to 140 foot-pounds. With the wheel safely back down on the ground, let's torque these in a crisscross manner. To install your center cover, you want to make sure that each one of these caps aligns with a lug nut. Go ahead and install these by hand. You don't want to strip them out. Okay friends, we finished our installation. At this point, hop in the passenger compartment, pump up the brake pedal till it's nice and firm. After that, take your vehicle for a road test, listen for funny noises, an ABS light, and get yourself safely down to your local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.